6.
Moshi 1 minute.
Okay.
Shavua Tov, Jenny.
Drought.
Shavua Tov, David.
David, Rabbi saw this here.
Wait.
Because I've already waited.
Okay. Link on YouTube.
I'll depend whether she has any dietary requirements. She said, can we avoid octopus? Yes.
Video on?
Not our video.
Yes.
What do you mean? Of course. What?
No,
our
I mean, so you
picture.
can see our face.
No, that for you. That way. Yes.
Got Jenny. Lloyd Grove, Kim Cohen. That's only us.
That's all.
I think he's doing a speaker.
Well, then you can-
Alan Taylor, how you doing? We didn't miss you for a long time.
Oh,
I think he doesn't hear us. Okay. Alan, do you hear us?
there you are. I think we're soundable, aren't we?
I can't hear anyone else. You turn this on.
Turn what off?
YouTube.
YouTube.
Talk to me, Kim.
Who's this?
Brian Gaminda.
Hello, Brian.
Hello,
Are you,
voice of heaven.
are you the host?
Brian, you seem to be labelled
Jenny's
as
the host.
Zerbib.
I'm the host.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Rabbi's the host, and Jenny's chairing the talk with the professor.
Jenny,
And Brian, I hadn't realised you'd had a change of name.
Long time ago.
yeah. Jenny, would you
Yes.
do you need the power of admin for this group, or are you going to share something? Or
Yeah, well, somebody, yes, please. Ian, I think, has prepared a few slides, so we need to
Okay.
enable him to
okay,
share screen.
okay,
You can do
was
somewhere
that
else.
right? 1 second, did I do that right? Not Brian, sorry.
Sorry about feedback. David's disappearing into another room. And then we'll need to mute.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ingrid.
Good evening.
Language.
Shavua Tov,
Everyone all right?
Hashem.
Good.
You can ask.
No.
Don't be shy. Yeah, so.
Wish you long, Francis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Have you done your 10,000 steps today, Jenny? You're muted, I can't hear you.
Probably not. It's probably about 5,000 because I'm going to shul and back, but who knows? Because I had my phone switched off and left at home.
Oh,
So you'll have to do 15,000 tomorrow. It is only about 5,000 up to the show and back. I know
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
know that. So
Well, I think if I get to 280, I'll count in the 5,000 per Shabbat. But I'm aiming to do the 300,000 excluding Shabbat.
but you didn't say that.
I do hope we get more people.
Jenny, you give me the green light whenever you want me to start. You're on mute.
It's disappointing how few people have zoomed in, but I think we should start so that if and when Ian does join us, we're ready for him.
Okay, so
I
let's.
don't know why I said if.
When?
Reliable.
Okay. First of all, I want to open up this this series of Havdalah. It's our first for this year. So Bezrat Hashem, we will have success. It's the first one. So slowly, we will get to it. And hopefully, every other week or something like that, we'll do something special for Havdalah. This idea came from on the honor of our late member Brian Goldstein. May his neshama go higher in heaven. And therefore, we're dedicating the Havdalahs on Zoom on his name. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of Havdalah, those of you that don't know, there is 4 ingredients connected with Havdalah. The first thing is the wine, which is the blessing that we do on every special occasion. And second is the besamim. You see, I have over here a nice besamim. You can smell it. It's made out of different things that you can smell. We say minei besamim, and the idea is that when neshama goes out of Shabbos, it's missing something. So it has this gap between holy and unholy. So the good smell makes it calm down. As we say, smell is the highest level of physical towards the spiritual. And the last one is the ner, is the Havdalah candle, which we're going to light. And the reason why we light the candle is because the mitzvah, the first time Adam, just after Shabbos, he commanded to light the fire, as we in the Jewish tradition, we believe that was the first time man made fire. So he put together 2 stones and brought the fire. That was after Shabbat, not before Shabbat. And from that moment, we light. We say there's a difference between Shabbat and non-Shabbat. And the last, of course, is the blessing itself. The Mavdil ben Kodesh Lachol, where we say that there is a difference between holy and unholy. This is basically the whole concept of Havdalah, is to say that we differentiate between holy things and unholy things. They come in 2 categories, and we are doing that in distinction with the Havdalah. Just to bear in mind, I'm going to do my blessings over here, but you can all, if you have your kit with you, you can smell the smell, see the light, or drink the drink, whatever you have in your home, and join us in the Havdalah. So, Mashi, it's a flavor. You come here next to me. We'll have to be careful with the fire in this place. So I'll do it right just before I'll do the blessings. Okay. הנה לשיט יפתח ולא יפחד כי יוזיב וזימת יד אדוני ויהי לי ישועה ושבתם המסוס ממעלה ישועה לאדוני שלום ומחבך תחסה לאדוני צבאות עמנו וסגן אלוהי הכל סלע אדוני צבאות אשר אדם בוטח בך אדוני יושיע מלך יעננו ביום קוראנו. Everyone say together. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות עשו, שם אדוני יקרא שרים רענן, ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני ושמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מורה האש.
אמן.
ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, המבדיל בין קודש לחול ובין אור לחושך ובין ישראל לעמים, ובין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
אמן.
Amen.
אליהו הנביא, אליהו הגנדי, אליהו הגנדי. במהרה יבוא אלינו, במשיח בן דוד, במשיח בן דוד. I'm just going to say the blessing of על המחיה. מלך העולם, ומבדיל בין קודש לחול ובין אור לחושך ובין ישראל לעמים, ובין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
אמן. אמן.
I'll give it a big afna. Okay. Thank you very much. Before I start to go to our second point, we're going to say the where is it? The memorial prayer. Does anyone want to say the Kaddish after memorial prayer in English or in Hebrew? If not, I will do so in English. Okay. May stand up. אל מלא רחמים שוכב במרומים, אלוה הסליחות, חנון וחום מחפיים אב חסד, אמצך פרת פשע וקרבת ישר, מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, מעלות קדושים וטהורים כזועקים הזירים, עדני שמות, Sarah bat Yosef, grandmother of Elizabeth Granger, Leah bat Abraham, the mother of Claire Arton, Ze'ev, the father of Patricia Bloomfield, David ben Yitzchak, the father of Frida Kozmin, Hannah bat Avigdor, the sister of Francis Taylor, Shaul ben Tzvi HaKohen, the father of David Watchtail and the husband of Talmud Watchtail, Ze'ev ben David, the father of Linda Landsman, Basha bat Yaakov, the mother of Janet Rotkoff, Tzvi ben Moshe, the father of Anne Robinson, the father of Steve Cohen, Shalom Meir Yosef ben Yitzchak, the father of Isaac Hutter, Fega bat Pinchas, the mother of Tamar Watchtail, Zelig ben Moshe, Melech HaKohen, father of Murray Arton, Binyamin ben Yirmiyahu Halevi, the son of Jeremy Stern. אשר הלכו לעולמם, אנא מלאכם יזכר להם לטובה כל זכויותיהם וצדקותיהם מארצות הרעים, הובטח להם שערי צדק ואורה, שערי חמלה וחנינה וצדק ואחת תסתירו לעולמים, וצבאו בצבא חיים מנשמותיהם, אדוני ונחלתם וינוח בשלום על משכביהם, ונאמר אמן. Magnificent and sanctified, may his great name be in the world where he's created by his will. May he establish his kingdom in lifetime and in your days, in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon. May his great name be blessed forever at all times, blessed and praised, glorified and exalted. Raised and honored, uplifted and loud be the name of the Holy One, blessed be he, beyond any blessing, song, praise, and consolation uttered in the world. And let's say together, Ose Shalom Imomam, Yase Shalom Aleinu. Kol Israel, Amen. May be seated. So, before we continue with Jenny and our guest speaker, I just wanted to say to share with you a small story. Maybe some of you have heard it, but it's brought in the Talmud. And this story emphasizes the importance of thinking ahead. And this is exactly what this Shabbos awareness is all about. The Eco Shabbat it's mainly not about us. Of course, we have implications about our generation too, but it's about thinking for the next generation. So let me share you a story that is brought in Tract Ta'anit 23b. It relates in an interesting incident about the sage Choni HaMa'agel. He was a Tana in a Mishnah era, just around after the second destruction of the second temple, or within the second temple. And he actually is the one that, the word Choni HaMa'agal, Ma'agal means a circle in Hebrew. And why was he called Choni the circle? That's not a nice name, actually. Choni you could call it guys the triangle guy or a circle guy. Well, what does it mean? But it comes from a story. He once prayed for rain, and there was no rain in his time, and he davened to Hashem with all his might, and said, Hashem, please answer. And there was no rain. So then he did an act. He drew a circle around him, like a meter on a meter or whatever it is, and he said, Hashem, if you don't bring rain, I'm not leaving this circle. Not leaving the circle? Okay, don't leave the circle. But sure enough, okay, here we are. Sure enough, Choni HaMa'agel, throughout his life, Hashem answered his prayers, and it was proper rain. But the same person, that was his name, the same person was once walking in the street, and he saw an old man plowing the land, and he's putting some seeds for a tree. And he asks this man, well, what type of tree are you planting? So this man says, I'm planting a carob tree. And this carob tree takes a long time. And he asks him, how long does it take for this tree to bear fruit? So this man replied, 70 years. And he further asked him, are you certain that you will live another 70 years? The man replied like this, I found a ready grown carob tree in this world. As my forefathers planted these for me, so too I plant these for my children, that they should come. And the Talmud brings there that Hashem made the Choni HaMa'agel, he sat down to sleep, and he woke up after 70 years, and he saw that man, and basically in the future, picking those fruits of the carob tree after 70 years. And he saw, and he came to the guy and says, who are you? And it wasn't the man. He looked exactly the same. And he says, I am this person's grandson. So after 70 years, his grandson already picked. And the idea and the message is very, very powerful. It is that many times we do things for ourselves. We do things for our children. But there comes a time in history that we have to do things not just for ourselves and for our children, for our grandchildren, for the generations ahead. And we don't see the fruits right away. It takes many, many years to see the fruits. So this is a moment that we in our synagogue, and I believe Jenny will go in more depth, and our guest speaker also will go in more depth about how to make an impact in this world. But just to remind you that within our duty is to take care not only about our generation, but about the generation that is to come, for our children and our grandchildren, in order that we should have a safe and beautiful earth and a world like Hashem gave it to us. And let's keep it, and let's guard it, and let's make it stay as beautiful as it is today. Shavua Tov Umevorach.
Shavua Tov.
Jenny, I pass it over to you.
Thank you. Can you give Ian screen sharing rights while I introduce him? So it's with great pleasure that it's our privilege to have with us today Ian Hamilton, who's Professor of Energy, Environment and Health at UCL. He's a sustainable design engineer with expertise in energy demand in buildings, energy technology deployment, indoor environmental quality and health impacts. He has also undertaken research and consultancy on evaluating UK government housing and energy policy, environmental master planning design and sustainable development, research on energy demand and energy efficiency in buildings, and low carbon technologies. Ian works at the UCL Energy Institute and the UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering at the Bartlett School of Environment, Energy and Resources. Prior to joining UCL, he worked in the engineering and building development industry in the UK as a project engineer to develop sustainability strategies for over a dozen master plan scale developments in the UK and abroad, including the London 2012 Olympic Parkland. And prior to this, he developed urban development strategies in Canada. Ian has worked as a consultant to government and private industry, and he has been a member of the Lancet Commission on Health and Climate Change. Ian, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you everyone for this gracious invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you today about some research that myself and colleagues across the world really are undertaking. And it really builds on the last few messages I was hearing from the Rabbi in describing this future that we have now to take very seriously what actions we're going to take to protect that for our children, my children, their grandchildren. So if I may, I would like to speak to you a little bit about a report that we just put out and give you a few, I suppose, some scary things to say, but also some things that we can do to help to put this plan of action in place and to avoid what we think to be some of the most consequential impacts. So I'll share my screen, and then if any reason it's not visible, someone will let me know, but hopefully that is good. Thank you, Jenny. So as Jenny said, I lead the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, and each year we present a report for the last 5 years. And this year we have outlined a code red for a healthy future. And really this is a message to the policymakers who are meeting in these 2 weeks at COP26 in Glasgow, that really now is the time to ensure that we're taking those actions seriously, putting in place policies that can really ensure, because otherwise we're sitting here at a moment in time when all the red warnings are going around us, and we need to be quite serious about what we do next. So, and this is really an illustration. When we, in this report, which I'll come to in a moment, it's about tracking both the impacts of climate change as those have on our health today, and also the impacts that the actions that both contribute to climate change and those actions that we can take to mitigate and adapt to climate change can be beneficial or have an impact on our health. And so in this year's report, we cite that these impacts of climate change, the direct ones that we're already experiencing today, are increasing over the world. So if you're not familiar, the idea is that we've already experienced a 0.5 degree of global warming in our temperatures already today. That's from pre-industrial times, from the turn of the last century. Now, we have already emitted enough carbon emissions that we'll see a further almost 1.5 degrees rise. So these are emissions that we've already emitted. And now the question is, what can we do to minimize emissions such that we're not going to experience 2, 3, 4 degrees of rise in our future? Because the effects that we're seeing today, and I'll highlight some of those for you, is that they're going to continue to grow over time. And the longer we delay our actions, the greater the risk will be. So what sort of impacts? Heat on one, the vulnerability of food and water security, the spread of infectious disease. These are the types of things that climate change through global warming can continue to affect. And of course, what we've seen over the last 18 months now, almost 2 years, is that the world, in terms of how it responds to these crises, are exacerbating inequities. And that the challenge that we have is to ensure that the actions we're taking today can empower and ensure that vulnerable communities will be protected going forward and not further at risk. And I think this is where, unfortunately, we've seen the way in which we've responded to COVID as being some of those, falling into the trap that we've continuously fallen in over time. So the need for protection of the most vulnerable who don't have the capability necessarily. The last thing is the way in which we need to take these actions seriously now today, and the same that we have taken action for COVID-19, is the need to be able to put in place policies, actions, etc., that will ensure that our economic, environmental, and sustainable health are protected going forward. Okay, so that sets a little scene for what this report has outlined, but what do we do? So these are the reports that we've published over the last 5 years. We started in 2009, and then in 2014, we kind of revitalized the commission. And in the 2009 publication, we identified as climate change being the single greatest threat to human health ever faced. And in 2014, what we reviewed in the evidence was actually that our actions to mitigate climate change could be the greatest health opportunity. And so the purpose of the Lancet Countdown was to count down to 2030 by tracking these changes that affect our health, both in terms of climate change, as I said before, and also actions that mitigate and adapt to climate change. So we work with partners across the world. Over 93 authors have contributed to this year's report. It's a major undertaking. And what I want to do now is just maybe illustrate a few of these trends that we see. So one of the indicators that we track is around vulnerability to heat. And so when we look at those who are over the age of 65 and under the age of 1, the number of days of exposure to heat waves, so this is measured as over 28 degrees. So when the number of days increases over time, and particularly among vulnerable populations who are, in these cases, older or younger, we're seeing that this has increased drastically since 2010. This is a steady increase in that exposure. And the question is, well, how do you minimize that exposure? Well, right now, that would be through things like air conditioning, making sure that there's access to cooling stations. In particular for those under 1 year old, is also advising and informing parents as to how it is that they can protect their children. They may not have the means, however. Another thing that we've tracked over time is infectious disease spread. So I know we're all familiar with that idea at the moment, but the climate suitability. So as the environment warms, there are certain types of bacteria and virus and mosquitoes that are capable of living in environments that they had not been in for a long time. And so what we see, for example, in dengue, which is typically considered to be more of a tropical disease, is that risk is increasing in places such as Europe. And so the problem is that we don't have a lot of experience with detecting that. I mean, we have experience with treatment, and there are many treatments available, but if we don't know what we're looking for, so this is where detection in hospital settings, people presenting themselves to emergency rooms need to understand what it is that we're facing. And of course, then the advice that comes alongside, West Nile in southern England is, not far off. The other thing that we see is drought. And this is a really disturbing picture in my view, but in 2020, up to 19% of all the global land surface was affected by extreme drought in any given month. And when you look at where drought occurs, particularly in the African continent and also Latin American, in particular Brazil, and where the rainforests are, drought is very problematic for any number of reasons. There's crops, need for water. There's infrastructure for power. If you think of Brazilian use of hydroelectricity, that's a major risk. But also things that maybe we don't think about a lot, which is, for example, a lot of the power sector in Europe is reliant on having access to water. So the France nuclear system has had to shut down several times over the last number of years because of a lack of water. So these sorts of risks continue to present themselves. And lastly, in terms of the direct effects is of things like wildfires. And again, each year we go forward, we see more wildfire occurring. And what this measures is the number of days in which people are exposed to very high or extremely high fire risk. So it doesn't mean necessarily that fire has occurred, but that the risk for fire is heightened because of that dryness. And we see the devastating effects of fire in terms of claiming infrastructure and livelihoods, but also, as we know, the smoke can carry all across the continent, across the world, and affect people in terms of asthma and other breathing issues. Okay, so then that's the direct effects of climate change already embedded, already happening. And it's interesting also to consider, well, the actions that contribute to climate change themselves. So fossil fuels are responsible for 73% of all greenhouse gas ever emitted. So the issue here then is, well, what do fossil fuels also present as a risk is air pollution. This is local air pollution, whether that's through diesel vehicles or coal-fired power stations. They're contributing to mortality rates. So 3.3 million people a year attributable to exposure to PM 2.5. And when we look at where that's occurring, it's in medium and high human development index countries. So these are effectively a middle and higher middle income countries. And where it is that they're occurring, industry and power plants. We also know that the diet, what we consume, has a carbon footprint. So I said that fossil fuels were responsible for 73%. And among that overall picture, agriculture, which uses both fossil fuels for things like fertilizers, but also land use change, is responsible for around 23% as a part of that pie. And so the issue that we look at is, of all agricultural emissions, 60% come from one species alone, and that's ruminants, that's cows. So the problem that we have is that there's an increasing amount of production of red meat, and that number in terms of our consumption poses a health risk. So this figure here is really just describing that excess consumption of red meat. So this is not this is where we focus our efforts is we're not saying that there's no capability of consuming certain types of meat, but the implications in the environment and of course for health in terms of the excess consumption presents a risk. I'm going to say one last thing about these indicators. Well, I've got a few others, but depending on the time. Something else I was going to describe was the healthcare sector. So globally, we have commitments from countries looking at the Sustainable Development Goal. And one of them is effectively providing healthcare for all. It is an exceptionally important thing that we continue to strive to ensure that care is available for everyone who needs it and in a fair and low cost way. The problem from a climate change perspective is that healthcare is responsible for almost 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's to do with, operations of hospitals, of ambulatory systems, of purchasing of goods. And so the implication of providing healthcare for all in our current way is going to be a major problem for greenhouse gas emissions. So I'll come to this in a second as to what England has committed to, but I think there's some really interesting things that can be done. I'm just going to touch very briefly on two others before I close out discussion on indicators. But what we also do is we track the effects of climate change in terms of economic productivity, let's say. And so here, because of the increase in heat, people are not able to go and work outdoors, or if they do, they're at a higher risk of heat-related outcomes, diseases, or instances. And so what this is showing is just these light green bars are people who work outdoors in agriculture, either shade or direct sun. So these are farm workers. And when you look across the world, the risk to GDP has continued to play an important role here. So basically people, if they are working outdoors, they're going to be at greater exposure to heat and of course crop productions as well because of water reduction. So it's a very tenuous situation for many locations. Just lastly on this is, are people taking it more seriously? Are they putting climate change and health concepts together? So we've seen this is linking government leaders' discussions in UN general debates and other UN forum. And we see this intersection of health and climate change continue to occur, which is very important, because I think the way in which we personalize this existential and real world crisis is by making it personal. And health is one of the ways in which we can do that. So I'm just going to say two more things and I'll be happy to open up for discussion. But what is it that we can do? Well, one of the things that we can do certainly is in our respective lives and in those where we are employed and the like, and also our policymakers, to see them make commitments. So last year, we worked with the NHS in England to develop their carbon strategy, and in particular, the net zero commitment that they put in place by 2045. And what this figure on the right shows is when we look at all the things the NHS does that contribute to climate change and their greenhouse gas emissions, the supply chain, as you can see, is incredibly important. Now, if anybody's familiar, the NHS is an incredibly large organization across England. It's the largest employer in Western Europe, and it's one of the largest and greatest single supply chain purchaser in the world. So importantly, decisions such as the NHS to commit to decarbonizing, and in particular the supply chain, will have ramifications across the world. And this is really important for big global leaders such as the NHS to make a commitment to put in place these types of actions. I'm just going to add one last thing, and that is when we look at the potential benefits that if we were to achieve what we set out in Paris, is, all the global countries came together in Paris in 2015 and committed to minimizing emissions to keep ourselves to less than 2 degrees of temperature rise, and ideally, but is unlikely at this point now, is 1.5 degrees. But what if we did? And so this study, which we also did, looked to say, well, among these 9 major economies of the world, if they were to meet those Paris Agreement goals, what could the health benefits be as a result of cleaner air, improved diets, and increased physical activity? And they are substantial. These are real world things that can be put in place today that can help us now, but also at the same time, avoid that climate that we are so at risk of going forward. So I think that was all I was gonna say. I don't think I have anything else after that. So happy to open up for any conversation, and I guess over to you, Jenny. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So we've had a few questions. It's probably simplest if I just read them out. So Kim Cohen's asking, is Greta Thunberg and her scientific advisors right in saying that we are still speeding in the wrong direction in emissions? Has COP26 resolved anything?
So they are correct in that we continue to emit every year more emissions going forward. This past year, with the economic crisis that ensued as a result of the pandemic, emissions did drop by about 7%. And what we know, however, is countries are full-fledged to get back towards an economic productive level. The issue is that we're seeing a big rebound. So it dropped 7%, and now it's going to rebound back up 7-8% more. So we're still headed in the wrong direction. There are some, however, countries that continue to decarbonize. So in fact, actually, the UK has been decarbonizing over the past 2 decades, and it is a world leader on that front. And it's the sort of thing which, by shutting down coal fire, by increasing the amount of offshore wind, it's making huge impacts, which is very good to see. But others need more action. And in particular, those who were missing from this year's summits, China, Russia, they still have a major role, and it's going to be very important for them to put actions on the table.
Thank you. And following on from that, how would you respond to people saying, what's the point in me making tiny changes in my life, given that other people in this country are doing little and that China and India are doing so much in the wrong direction?
Yeah, I think that that's a fair question. And I suppose there's a couple of reasons why I would encourage and be encouraging to make those changes. One is that they are going to be, good for you, as in it's going to cost you less. So, whether that's driving an electric car, I think we've just recently seen what that might offer, which is no need to queue at the petrol. The other thing, of course, is, by making your home warmer, so insulating your home, getting new windows, looking at different, getting off a gas boiler. These things are going to reduce your energy bills. The other thing is around diet as well. I mean, it's one of the things that, if you noted in that last slide, was that diet's very important, both in terms of its carbon emissions, but our own health. And our diets have changed enormously. And Jenny, I know you know this, but over the past 2 generations, night and day, in terms of what food and how much we consume. And these are things that we can do to improve our health. These little actions, they're very important. So the encouraging thing is I suppose, on one hand, taking some degree of control over what you can, but also, and this is the number one, knowing who is responsible. And that's when you look to your leaders, whether they be the politician, your MP, the people in your organization who can make commitments to align. And that's the first thing, is we need to recognize it's not only about our actions, it's also encouraging others to make that choice.
Thank you. And I'll be coming back to that. So two more questions. One, a few years ago, Brian saying we were encouraged to drive diesel cars. How could government get it so wrong? And will encouragement to drive electric also have environmental negative effects through lithium mining and disposing of these huge batteries?
Right, excellent questions. The diesel scandal ultimately was partly to do with, and this is where Volkswagen and Bosch were very quickly, penalized for it. They lied. There was no such thing as a low emission diesel. The issue was that there's a technical reasoning for it, but the catalytic converters basically just did what they were supposed to do on the test, but then never did it again outside of that. So they were never as low emission. In fact, London's air pollution during that great boom of diesel vehicles continued to increase and exceed the European and WHO levels for particulates. And that was a big contributor to that. So diesel vehicles, they produce a lot of low level emissions, a lot of nitrous oxides, and those things are harmful to people walking along the sidewalk on the street. The other thing is, in terms of electric vehicles, it's a really important point, and we should think of it in this way. The batteries and the source of lithium right now is an emerging global market. So right now, there's certainly going to be some, bad practices around mining and extraction of lithium. We've seen that in North African countries where some of this comes from. But interestingly as well, there's going to be new sources identified. So in Cornwall, for example, to make use of the old tin mines, actually there's lithium in those mines that can be used and extracted, and that's going to be an economic boon for a part of the country that hasn't responded so well in the last couple decades with closure of mines and the like. So I think there's going to be more responsibility placed on those, and the environmental targets are going to follow that as countries see that as a more major source. And lastly, it's a transition technology. Lithium ion batteries are, let's say, 25 years old in terms of their being at the leading edge. There's going to be new batteries that are coming forward soon that don't have that level of environmental impact either.
Thank you. And then finally from Alan, I hear about the need to phase out coal and the use of oil, but I don't see where the alternative energy sources are going to be nearly enough to meet real world needs. Wind power, nuclear power, with one argument being we shouldn't be using that either. These alternatives being developed are nowhere near enough.
So it's an interesting, when we look at it in isolation for a given country, and so the UK is a very good example of this, the amount of wind available on any number of days in this year was probably exceeding 50 to 60. And there were days where it was 100% wind. So all of the electricity consumed in the country was only coming from the offshore wind. Now, of course, there's moments where wind doesn't blow. And that's where we need to ensure that there are systems available for backup. But actually what is a better strategy, and one which we can do together, is through power sharing. And that's where, if you look to the United States, one of the reasons why Texas, if you recall earlier this year, was unable to withstand the snowstorm, basically, was because they don't have an integrated energy network. So Texas stands alone by itself, and unfortunately it collapsed by itself. The UK and other countries nearby, we actually already have power sharing. And so it's more easy for us to say, well, the sun is shining and the wind is blowing in southern Spain. High volume power can be directed all across the continent. We're also going to just see more storage. And this is something where when you have a lot of renewable being produced all at one moment, there's going to be a need to store that for the times that we don't have it available to us on demand. And there's going to be, many more. This is what you see in Australia. What they've done, I think it's about 70% of all roofs have photovoltaic panels in Australia. And there's interesting reasons for that. One is that the coal-fired power stations in Australia have continuously basically failed. And people took it in their own right to just start installing panels, local storage on their in their homes, and also community storage. And it's been surprising how quickly that's been adopted in a country that isn't necessarily thinking of its solar resource as a competitor to coal, but it is.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Kim to say a few words in a moment, but I'd just like to say a bit about what we're planning for our synagogue. So Eco Synagogue is a cross-communal organisation in partnership with the Board of Deputies, and its approach is both communal and universal. It's led by Rabbi David Mason from Muscle Hill United Synagogue, and also 3 rabbis from the Masorti Reform and Liberal movements. So for our shul, it's being led by Kim Cohen, supported by me, and we're starting with an environment audit. The Eco Synagogue audit looks at 5 areas: community and synagogue management commitment, prayer and teaching, lifestyle, land, buildings and consumables, and 5thly, community and global engagement. So we'll be doing this audit to assess what we're currently doing, and then the Eco Synagogue organisation will support us to improve Northwood Shul relationship with its environment as a building, as a community, as individuals, and as part of a wider conversation on this very important topic. The Torah tells us that we are trustees of God's creation, and it is our responsibility as communities and individuals to protect our planet and to leave it to our children and grandchildren in a state of wholeness and health. So the climate emergency requires us, each of us, to do our bit to reducing carbon emissions, and as Ian has said, reaping the co-benefits of improving our health and in many cases saving money. Now, we did try this a couple of years ago, but we didn't get very far, and we were focusing then on the shul rather than the broader community. We managed to source some compostable glasses to use instead of plastic, but because of COVID and not having had many social and Kedushin, we're still working through the existing stock. We also explored having recycling at the shul. It turns out it's much more complicated than for us as individuals because of it being a business. And then COVID struck, and we now need to go back and sort that out. So that this time, because of the work with the Board of Deputies, there's good support to help us, but we need as many members of Northwood Shul as possible to be involved. So we're looking for a few volunteers to join Kim and me in developing and then implementing an environmental policy and planning what we're going to do. And we'd also like everyone to contribute by making small changes in their own behaviours. And now, Kim, if you'd like to say a few words.
Right. Thank you very much, Jenny. Firstly, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to us on a very, very interesting work that you're doing and the research you're doing. And I think that it's very timely at the moment, because if I can just say one thing, that the rabbi who's coordinating it across our movement, the United Synagogue, said to me one thing. He said, slow it down, just start the journey, make sure as many people, individuals, actually join the journey. And really, you've mirrored very much that you've actually now provided some research to back this up, saying that actually we all have to contribute to this, and the aggregation of all our individual efforts will actually come to something. So thank you so much for sharing your countdown research on health and climate change. And shockingly, the code red that you've actually highlighted, that shows us really that in the background, there's a real imperative here for us to do this. And I think part of the problem, I think, is people haven't seen the imperative, but what you have done is you've linked that to COVID-19, where everybody understood the imperative. You know, we have to get vaccinated if we're going to get well, or we have to do something in order to avoid sickness. You've now actually put health at the center of climate change. And I think that in itself is something that we, that's, you know, Jenny and I, and Jenny's way ahead. She started this 2 years ago, I have to say this, that we can actually communicate that to our community, that this is actually just more than 1.5%. It doesn't mean very much to people. That's the problem. Well, you know, sorry, 1.5 degrees. If we actually now start relating some of the results of your research, saying, well, actually, we've already polluted the atmosphere and we're now going to reap the benefits or really the impact of that. And that's going to have an impact on over 65s, under ones, and the rest. So I think we can only thank you so much for continuing to reinforce this message and obviously providing the scientific base for a lot of the imperatives that we have to now adhere to. So thank you once more for taking the time. And really, perhaps if I can say this, Jenny, if you'd like to come back and talk to us again, it would be a pleasure really to hear how your research is going. It is so fascinating. And I think that we are starting this journey, and hopefully next time you come, we'll have more people actually clued in and clued up on what they have to do. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kim. I appreciate that, and would look forward to coming again to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And next week, the Rabbi will be making HAVDALA at 5:20, and then we have a short video. Next Shabbat is Jewish Women's Aid, and we have a short video about domestic abuse. And Ian will be circulating a document from Jewish Women's Aid about how to recognize signs that somebody might be suffering. It's very important that we're all more aware of this to
You're muted.
yes. Did anything of that come through? No.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
the last part.
So that it's very important that we're all more aware of how to identify in friends or acquaintances of problems that they might be suffering but keeping quiet about. So from one sort of problem to another, to something very different. Thank you very much, Ian. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you so
everybody.
much for
Thank
everyone.
you, Rabbi. And see you maybe in shul next week, some of you.
Chazak v'or. Shavua Tov. All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Shabbat Tov. Very good. Shakar, Jenny, it was very nice.
Thank you.
Ingrid, good to see you. Pleasure.
You're muted, Ingrid.
Thank you. That was so interesting. I've written a lot of notes down.
Oh, God, in that case, Ingrid, you can write the article for Alan. If I tell you a bit about Ian, you can write, if you've made some
Oh, I
notes.
can't. It's out of my, I don't think you should do it.
Yeah.
I've got so much on with this today.
Yeah.
I can't breathe. Oh, by
Okay.
the way, thank you. You ended up on the 7th with more people than any other day. And that was the one day we didn't have anybody. You did extremely well.
Yes. So
I will pop in just for morale. I've got to pick
thank you.
something
That's
up.
very kind. Thank you.
Yes.
Because I can't, but yes. And luckily, Alan sent that email out. We had so many people volunteering to help that some people were really angry that I had rejected them. You know, it was just the question of we've got enough volunteers, and also my new account, a whole load of things from people, because the subject line was something like bulk email, a whole load went into spam, and I didn't spot them for a few days. So some of the people who replied really early on, we were filled up before then. So most people just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, you know, fair enough, we offered to help, you don't need us. But a couple of people were really quite